Hello, thank you so much for convening this virtual conference. Thank you to our interpreters so much. And thank you all for being here on yet another Zoom call after the summer that we've all had. So I'm going to dive right in, and some of what I'm saying does assume some ideological whatever. So if there are any challenges to anything that I have to say, I very, very much welcome not just questions, but challenges, critiques, call me out. I want this to be a true discussion. I don't want you to just nod and say, okay, and with glazed looks, go on to your next session. I want this to be a galvanizing time as much as it can be. So I want to start with a question that is not rhetorical. I would be interested to hear some people's responses. Why are you in the arts? What brought you to this field? What brought you to this point, to this conference today? I'm sure that there are as many answers to that question as there are people attending this conference, but I would assume that somewhere in that answer, somewhere a salient point through all the answers would be something about beauty, something about ideas, something about sharing and communication. That is what makes the arts special, are those things. That is what I hope we all hold dear at the very core of ourselves. We certainly didn't get into this for the money, right? Because if we did, then we're all doing it wrong. So somewhere along the way, all of those feelings, those ideas became commodified, they became codified and professionalized because we were told and believed that that was the way to get things done. And my assertion today is that we have all allowed the exigencies of the capitalist system in which the arts are firmly placed to make hypocrites out of all of us, because the way that the arts are funded, the way that we do business, is fundamentally unjust. That is my assertion today, and that's what I would like to talk about with all of you. I originally wanted to name my session, quote, burn it all down, an anti-capitalist call to action. But the conference conveners advised me that no one would sign up if I called it that. So I hewed to their wisdom. And I do want to say that, of course, and this is where we get into some assumptions about how you come at American history, how you come at racial and social justice, or just justice, as I like to call it, is that if you really think about how the arts are funded largely through private, mostly white, wealthy donors, you will begin to see how we need to change. We need to change our models. We need to change our accepted conventions and our conventional wisdom. That wisdom that told us that in order to get things done, if you want to get that cash to get your play produced, to get your programming off the ground, to have your classes, these are the things that you need to do. That is what I want to challenge today. So I'm going to go from sort of an inter-organizational look and broaden outwards. So first, I want to say no more diversity committees or jobs. So I want to share an anecdote with you. I have a friend, Jenna, who is a statistician in New York City, She works for a commercial concern that sells books online. And in light of the events of the summer, the racial unrest, they, of course, scrambled to create a diversity committee. And my friend Jenna, being hilarious and cynical, rolled her eyes and was like, oh my God, do I want to be on this committee? She really wasn't sure, but after some weeks of consideration, she finally decided, okay, let's do this. I want to make a difference. I want to make a change. So one of the central pieces of the recommendations for the executive leadership was that they divest from Facebook. Now, if you're not familiar with where this is coming from, I will refer you to a newsletter called Popular Information. And in fact, if I can pull it up without being too cumbersome, I want to read you a quote from that newsletter that will sort of give some context about why it was important for the diversity committee on which Jenna was serving that their executive team divest from Facebook. So let's see. So this article that I'm going to quote from is referring to a report that two civil rights advocates, they sort of did a civil rights audit of Facebook as a company. And so this article is talking about their findings. This is kind of a long quote, so settle in. The report zeroes in on what's troubling about Facebook's policies, as articulated by Clegg and Zuckerberg. They do not represent a commitment to free expression. The policies privilege expression of the powerful over all other people. This is not just unfair, it makes it even more challenging to protect civil rights on the platform. Elevating free expression is a good thing, but it should apply to everyone. When it means that powerful politicians do not have to abide by the same rules that everyone else does, a hierarchy of speech is created that privileges certain voices over less powerful ones. The prioritization of free expression over all other values, such as equality and non-discrimination, is deeply troubling to the auditors. Mark Zuckerberg's speech and Nick Clegg's announcements deeply impacted our civil rights work and added new challenges to reining in voter suppression. And what they're referring to there is the fact that politicians, and especially the president, are not subject, or were not at this time, subject to the same fact checking that other speakers on the platform were because of its newsworthiness. So because whatever the president says, of course, is newsworthy, it was not subject to the laws of reality that all of us, all the rest of us are bound by. And that was one of the things that these civil rights auditors were against and found troubling in their audit. So anyway, that's only one of the many reasons that Facebook is a problematic platform. And I will say, my own organization, our biggest source of connection to our audience is Facebook. But at the beginning of the summer, I did insist that we not boost any more ads or pay any more money to Facebook for the very reasons that I've just been talking about. So anyway, to bring it back to my friend Jenna. So the diversity committee at Jenna's company was like, hey, executive team, let's just not give Facebook any more money because of this, that, and the other thing. And the executive team was like, great, we love it, love your energy, not gonna do that. It just doesn't seem like a good fit for our company right now. And can you imagine how Jenna felt after having been so anxious about joining this diversity committee in the first place? That then they gave a very clear, actionable recommendation, and it wasn't followed. I know that I would have felt like a fool. I would have felt like a tokenized fool. And that is how she felt. And that's why I say no more diversity committees or diversity jobs. I've also observed within our field a spate of temporary jobs that seem to have as their aim to hire a person of color to basically count how many people of color there are within the organization or interacting with the organization. Now, I don't speak for all Black people, of course, but I know that as a Black person, I'm not interested in being hired to your organization to count how many Black people are involved with you. That's not appealing to me. You want a meaningful relationship with the Black community, with the Asian community, with any community with whom you don't have a real relationship, and that's what you're interested in. Start in an authentic place. I know that's easier said than done. You know, you can only hire for jobs that are open, but these sort of jobs that are hiring POC people for POC stuff, it's tokenizing. And I would love to refer you to an article by, let me just check my notes here. This article by Helen Kim Ho on medium.com. And the article is called 8 Ways People of Color Are Tokenized in Nonprofits. And it's a great article because it also starts out by going through, again, what I was talking about at the top of my presentation, which is recognizing that, you know, the arts are not divorced from the rest of the economy. The arts are not divorced from the forces of capitalism, and that in fact, we are even more subject to those forces, as the arts are not funded as meritocracies. We are funded through the charitable donations, largely, of private individuals, and how that can create so many inequities. And those are the things that we need to not only see, but move away from. And hopefully what I'm talking about today are some actionable ways that we can start to move in a more positive direction. So, so we've talked a little bit about how you can change and flip your way of thinking within your organization. And now let's move a little more broadly. So we're not all funded completely by individual private donations. We do also receive, or many of us do receive, funding from granting bodies either within our municipality, such as, for me, the Arts Council of Indianapolis, or for all of us, the Indiana Arts Commission. So what I want to say now concerns our relationship as administrators to those granting bodies. And what I would like for all of us to say to those granting bodies is no more project grants. And here's why. So another anecdote, if I may. I was so kindly asked to be on a grant evaluation panel at some point in my career. And I learned so much in just that short space of time, reading all of the grant requests, because I got to look at the budgets of a bunch of organizations. I got to see and evaluate the writing and narrative analysis of people who are asking for money, and on what basis are you asking for this money? What are you going to do with it? And what I saw in some instances was quite terrifying, because what I saw a lot were, when it would come to questions of how are you, or are you at all, benefiting underserved populations, there were lots of conflations and confusion about who was underserved. What does that mean? You know, for instance, one organization said, well, we have a Black person, you know, accessing our services, so we're definitely serving an underserved population, which, you know, that Black child could have been the son or daughter or child of an NBA player, in which case they're not economically underserved. Certainly, there is a very strong connection between race and class in this country, because that's the way that our government and many of its citizens wanted it. They wanted Black people to not have any money. But some Black people have a lot. And so there really was a sort of unfocused, unrefined approach to who are we serving, and how are we counting those people? Where do those people belong in our classification system? And I think that when we are applying for project grants as organizations, sometimes the tendency is to, we take, what I would see is that those organizations and the people writing the grants would take that sort of unfocused, unrefined, unsophisticated lens and analysis and say, okay, so mostly what we do is, let's say you're a ballet academy, and we want to produce, like, our main thing that we really want to do is a production of Romeo and Juliet. But because you're asking us to do something for an underserved population, we're going to do a hip hop Romeo and Juliet, and it's going to be dope. And that obviously is terrible. It's terrible and pandering. And once again, we come back to tokenization. So what I would say is, or what I would love to see within our field, is a de-emphasis on project grants. And let's all advocate for ourselves and for our field to move towards a model where we're given operational support so that we can make what we do cheaper. I mean, we've all had and heard that curtain speech where you go to your favorite performance, wherever and whoever it might be, you sit down in that hushed auditorium surrounded by the opulent settings and the buzz of the other patrons, the lights dim, the curtain is paged, and someone walks out and they begin their ask. They say, you know, ticket costs only cover a third of what it takes to get this production off the ground. And my thing is, well, then let's get some more operational support so that we can bring ticket costs down and we can bring more people to what we actually do, what we're really and truly good at. Not try to shoehorn ourselves into what we think a community with whom we have no relationship might want. And I will say, I have been involved in projects like that. I've been the recipient of services like that. It's just not good on any level. And I'm sure a lot of you have your own war stories about being involved with a project that felt unwieldy, felt inauthentic. And these are the reasons why, is because, you know, we're trying to come into the 21st century, and we're trying to sort of abide by the norms that our arts grantors are setting, because they have begun to ask us, who are you serving? They're asking us to think critically about what impact we're having and for whom. And I think that that's great. But I think that the sophistication and the buy-in of what is a just way for an arts organization to operate within the community, I think that we have a long way to go. And so until such time when everybody can really see society through a lens of justice, a lens of not, I don't like to put adjectives or qualifiers before the word justice, such as social justice or racial justice. It's just justice. I think if diversity committees had names like do the right thing committees or justice committees, it would be harder to ignore their recommendations. what we do when we put those qualifiers in front of the word justice, and when we put those qualifiers anywhere, is that we silo the work as though this work only has to do with people of color, and that just isn't true. It has to do with how we have built our society and how it can be better moving forward for everybody. I mean, maybe not for super rich people, but most everybody else. So let's see, let me just check my notes here again. Yes, okay, so that's point number 2. No more project grants. What I would love to see again is operational support so that we can just give more people access to what we already do well, rather than trying to pander or shoehorn ourselves into something that feels inauthentic and unconnected. Point number 3, the broadest point yet, we come to collective vision and action. So obviously, I recognize that asking a field as broad and varied as the arts to speak as one voice is in a lot of ways unrealistic. But I think that this shift that I'm advocating away from project grants, away from siloing justice into racial justice and social justice, I think that those things, those shifts, require a field-wide adoption of certain sets of values and principles. And they certainly require more collaboration and conversation between all of us. You know, as we all know, it's already hard enough to be an arts organization, to secure funding for your programming, to secure funding for your people, to pay people for the hard work that they're doing day in and day out. That to now say, well, not only do I need you to do all of this, but I need you to talk to this organization. I need you to collaborate with that organization. I get that that can seem very daunting. But ultimately, if we want to not only change the way we perceive ourselves in terms of, as I was saying before, internally, how does our organization, what's the complexion? What's the economic makeup of our organization internally? How do we present ourselves to our community? What services are we providing? These are ways that we perceive ourselves. Now I want us all to think about, how does our community that we're supposed to serve see us? I think that we need to, as a field, reposition ourselves as a service, almost like the post office, for example. You know, part of the reason, again, I go back to that question of, why are you in the arts? There's something special about the arts. I mean, none of us would be here, right, if we didn't believe that to our very core. And as such, I think it's imperative for us as a field to think of ourselves as people who can deliver those dreams that we had when we were young, those feelings of idealism, that yearning for connection. These are things that recognize the humanity in everybody, no matter what color, class, ability, it doesn't matter. These are the noble things about art. These are the things to keep. These are the things to preserve and lift up. All of that other stuff about how it gets funded, about how we do things, all of that stuff can be rethought and should be, but it's the core, the center of the arts that we should value. And that is what is of value to our community. The arts teaches us how to be human. And I think that for too long, we have been viewed and even viewed ourselves as a luxury. And that's not an accident. As I said before, the way that the arts are funded largely is part of why we are viewed in that way, as a luxury rather than a service. And so I think that's the other reason it's so difficult for us to secure funding, is because, and especially I think in Indiana, where the artistic economy is not as advanced as it is in some other states and localities, we need to become more pervasive. And we can only do that by being able to deliver our services to more people, which again connects to what I said about no project grants and moving towards more models of operational support. So as we're trying to shift away from a donor model to more of a consumer service model, that's going to take all of us. That's going to take an agreement, because just like in capitalism with price fixing, if only one company does it, then all the others are like, oh, well, we're gonna cut our prices and get all the customers. So it only works if we all move together as a field towards seeing ourselves differently, so that our communities see us differently, and so that our communities feel like we belong to them, that they can access us, and that we can share in those noble, special qualities that we all believe the arts to have. So I think specifically in Indianapolis, and I know that I'm talking to people all across the state, but I'm sure that the impacts of COVID are not specific only to my city. But just as an example, downtown, I think it's still a pretty desirable place to live, downtown Indianapolis, but pre-COVID, it was super hot. I mean, there were, and still are, condos going up everywhere. The prices were frankly outrageous for what they were delivering. And now it has cooled. You know, the heat that was on downtown has cooled, not only in terms of people choosing to live there, but in terms of people choosing to physically do business downtown. Now, I, of course, don't know where this is all going to go, where it's going to end, what the outcome is going to be. But I think that there are a lot of people that are speculating that downtowns, centers of commerce, centers of activity, dining, nightlife, they may see a cooling period of an indefinite length, because not only are people reluctant to go out, but people that had rented office space are saying, well, why do we need to rent office space? You know, my team is doing very well working from home, and this is saving me hundreds of thousands of dollars on overhead costs. And then what you see, of course, is a trickle-down effect. All of the little cafes and hair salons and knick-knack shops that had relied on the traffic of people in and out of these centers of commerce and activity are seeing their bottom line suffer as well. And I'm not saying that downtown Indianapolis is going to empty out, but I do see the heat cooling a little bit. And so, you know, I've been thinking, how do we bring people back downtown? And I think that, you know, convening places for the arts to gather across disciplines, I think these are things, these are visions that once are not only the citizens of our cities and our localities, municipalities, but also the people that run those municipalities. Once they begin to see what the arts can really do, that the arts are a service and not a luxury, I think we can make a better and stronger case for saying, okay, you know, you're wondering how to bring people back downtown, how to lift people up and get them to see possibilities instead of fears. These are ways to do this, is to give artists and arts organizations a convening place to gather and to bring people to us. Now, of course, I know my organization, we don't have the capital to buy a building and service it, but through collaboration with each other and through speaking with our elected officials, you know, bureaucrats who work within policymaking centers, we can make that case of, well, we don't really have the money to do this, but here's why you should invest in the arts. This is what the arts can do for this town, for this municipality, you know, for even this rural setting. I know and I hope that I'm talking to some people who are living in rural settings, and, you know, part of you may be saying, well, this session is called for Black Arts Administrators, and there's literally 2 Black people in our entire town. And that's okay, because what I'm saying has to do, again, not with only racial justice, but justice in general. And I don't want to dismiss the connection between race and class and money in this country, but what I'm saying goes very fundamentally to the core of how money works and flows, and how we can redirect that flow so that not only are we more able to sustain our organizations, but we are better able to sustain the communities in which we are embedded in a more equitable way. Because ultimately, I hope that's why we all chose at some point to become involved in the arts, is because we believed in humanity. Like I said, none of us are in this for the money. So why are we spending so much time worrying about who's got the money? How do we get that cash? I mean, I know that because we can't do anything without that money, but we need to build resiliency into our system. I think that COVID has shown us that beyond the shadow of a doubt. It has shown us the frailties that existed throughout this society that we've built, and especially in our own field. And I think that moving towards a system that relies on more people who are maybe paying less is actually a much better approach, a much more just and equitable approach. And that is the direction in which we must move, not only to be relevant, but to live our ideals, to be authentic to ourselves, to bring our sentiments more in line with our actions. So I think that's it, to be honest. I hope that, you know, I know I'm talking about some broad things, but if you really dig in, I hope that you can find actionable things for yourself and your organization to do and to move towards. That's really what I want, is for people to take steps. It's great to think about justice and to struggle with it and read all about it. And I think that's very important, but now is the time for action. This is a time, this sort of strange COVID, unrest, surrealistic time. This is the time for innovation and action. It's a time that will reward that. So with that, I am going to, oh my gosh, this has been a very short presentation. I hope that you're all getting your money's worth. No refunds. I will open it up to questions and challenges and critiques. Please, I'm very much looking forward to any of that anybody has. Oh, I guess I should look in the, let's see. Oh, yay, some people would have signed up for Burn It All Down. That's good to hear. Thank you for putting the articles in the chat. This is great. does anybody, like, does anyone hate me? Does anyone, does anyone want to step to me? Does anybody want to, like, let's, you know, let's set the conference on fire. Let's have a, you know, let's have a battle. Let's do it. Really and truly, even if, you know, I mean, I'm assuming that people who don't believe that race and class are connected wouldn't have signed up for this session. But if you're out there, please get at me, because I would love to talk to you. I do think it's important for us also on this session. Preaching to the choir is very self-affirming, and it feels great because you're like, I'm in a room full of people that agree with me, and that's like, feels good. But the real work begins when we're making the case for people who like think the arts suck, think Black people are lazy and don't deserve advancement, think people with different abilities should like suck it up. I mean, those are the people that we really need to reach. And I think, again, we are the people that are best suited to reach them. We are communicators. We are innovators. We share. That's what we do. And so have faith in that as we move forward to make our case, not only for our own existence, but to sort of evolve into a different form. Let's see. When you are thinking of restructuring how organizations seek dollars, are you referring to creating more partnerships, or were you suggesting something else? Okay, that is a great question. I think that yes, creative partnerships should be a key strategy, but again, what I'm talking about is when we are seeking dollars from any granting body, but specifically the granting bodies that are attached to our municipality, like arts councils, like arts commissions. I think what we need to do is, let me reframe my question or my answer. It needs to start before we seek the dollars. It needs to start the cycle before we're seeking the dollars. We need to ask to have a conversation with the people who are dispersing the funds and say, listen, this is not working. The way that you've got this all set up, this is why, you know, and I'm sure that each locality, each organization can point to like a horror story, and not just like with logistics. Like we all have grant report recipient logistical nightmares. I'm talking about the ways in which the dollars have influenced our thinking and maybe even warped it so that what we are saying and doing don't match. That we are rolling out inauthentic programming, trying to fit into what we think these granting bodies want us to do. And that's not, I don't think that's the fault of the granting organizations necessarily, but I think I have seen that the current model is not working and we need a change. So I think that to answer your question, yes, I think the case can be better made the more organizations are making it, but it's more about sitting down with funders in advance of the ask and saying, okay, this is how we want to shift, how this relationship works, how this whole thing goes down. So that's an excellent question. Sorry, I'm terrible with computers. Now I'm getting some good questions. Oh my gosh, I hope we have time for all these. This is great. I can't even, okay, there we go. Ideas about K-12 educational grants and how to approach them. Ooh, that's an excellent question. I don't know a whole lot about educational funding. And I don't know, you know, arts in schools, and then the distinction between arts in school and after school programming. You know, I think that's probably an important distinction, and I don't know which of those fields you're in, but I would say that, you know, again, okay, let me reframe again as I'm thinking. Something that I learned in my own career, delivering sometimes programming for younger people, was that programming that can approach the arts in a professional way. So, for instance, I recently finished a project in which I engaged a couple of children who lived, or youth, I'll say, who lived in a neighborhood that I was supposed to be working in, to design some disposable hazmat suits. And I paid them to do that. And then I said, I will also pay you to learn this choreography, and we're going to perform wearing our disposable hazmat suits. So what I loved about that project was that I was not the one making the art. I was not the one with all of the responsibility. It was basically like trade school, except for artists. And I think, again, that's how we reposition our field. So yes, the arts are about expression, but, and I think this is especially important in Indiana, as I said before, our artistic economy is not so sophisticated as others can be, is to get people to think of the arts as ennobling, as expressive, yes, but also as a legitimate career pursuit. I think that's where, in the context of children, we can make a better and stronger case of, you know, this is not just about something nice that, like, you know, in dance, people put their daughters in dance to make them more graceful or whatever. That it's not about that. It's about, these are viable careers. And all it takes to be a successful artist is exactly what it takes to be successful anything else. Consistency, commitment, reliability. These are things that the arts can teach just as well as a welding class, an auto mechanics class, you know. So I think that, again, we just need to adjust our thinking around our own field and deliver programming in that way. Let's see. What else? 12. Suggestions for other cities or countries that are taking a more equitable approach, more collective approach, untangling the arts from capitalism. I mean, I think part of where I am getting this whole perspective, of course, you know, so many American artists lament the fact that in Europe, the arts are subsidized, and if we could be subsidized, but the thing is, why would the American government subsidize the art? I mean, it does to a small extent, but why would the American government subsidize the arts when we don't think of ourselves? We don't deliver our services as a service. We sort of deliver them as a luxury, as recreation. It's incumbent upon us to change how our government and our communities see what we do in order for us to experience that sort of society-wide buy-in and acceptance that the arts are important. I think that's the main difference, is that for whatever reason, and I'm sure that there are people who are smarter than me and can speak to this in more detail, but in Europe, that is sort of a given, that the arts are important, that they teach us how to be human. In the United States, I think that we just, because maybe we are not subsidized, we've gone 180 degrees in the other direction and made ourselves into a luxury. So yeah, I would say that the model actually comes from other countries, the thinking that I'm talking about today. I hope that answers your question. It probably doesn't, but let's see. Any suggestions for a rural person of color governmental arts administrator on communicating how the arts will advance the community in a pragmatic way? That is such a good question. I think I think the more that you can get people to understand that our struggles are bound together. It isn't just, you know, unfortunately, I mean, we all have had the situation of like having to explain why the arts should even exist, right? We're having to make the case constantly for why we should even exist, why our jobs should exist. And I feel like, you know, certainly as a Black woman, and I assume that other people of color have had a similar experience, people will be like, well, why do y'all need special treatment? Or why do you get this or that? And I'm like, well, here's why. But what we need to do a better job of communicating is that our struggles are bound together. This isn't about racial justice or social justice. It's about justice. The current system of funding is fundamentally unjust. And so it's creating this barrier between the arts and the people. And sorry, I'm just looking at your question to make sure I'm actually how the arts will advance the community in a pragmatic way. So that word pragmatism, I think, is really the stumbling block for people. Of course, the arts aren't for everybody. I get that. But you never know who it's for until it can be accessed by everybody. Those students in schools or those adults just walking around in your community that are sullen, uncommunicative, unreachable, unproductive, you never know what will reach those people until they have a chance to access the arts. It may make a transformational difference. We all believe in the transformative power of the arts. That's why we're here. That's why you're taking part in a Zoom conference, for heaven's sakes, that lasts 2 days. So that issue of pragmatism, I think that can sometimes be a stumbling block for artists. How do you make the pragmatic case for the arts? And I think that, again, once we are able to deliver our services at a more reasonable rate, because that can sometimes be the barrier, then we can say, all right, this is something that anyone can access. And if you've sort of tried everything, if you are sort of a dissipated, disaffected individual, try the arts. That's where the pragmatism comes in, is reaching people who have been formerly unreachable, giving purpose to people that have been hitherto purposeless. I know that's what the arts did for me. So, and I know that, again, that's very grand and not specific, but I'm gonna put, or I don't know if you can see my email, but I'll put it somewhere. So if you have questions or you want to just talk more, we can all do that. Let's see, you said no more diversity committees, but used an example of committees who are ignored. What about committees that are truly putting forward change and all of their recommendations are taken seriously as actionable items? That is an excellent point. I have never come across a committee like that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think that if that was happening, then that's great. That's exactly how a diversity committee should function. I just have never seen one function in that way. That's why I'm saying no more of them. But that's an excellent point. 10 minutes left. Okay, there's my email. Let me make sure that I got to everybody. Okay. Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm allowed to end early or if they're gonna, okay, great. I'm getting a thumbs up. Um, oh, yes. What are people reading and listening to? That's a great question. Oh, and mine. Um, what? Honestly, you know what? I just, there's a podcast called Phoebe Reads a Mystery, and she has been reading a chapter of Jane Eyre a day, which is sort of like, um, I always thought an old, fusty, like novel that I think it's of the Gothic era that I felt like did not apply to me, but I didn't know. She started reading it, and I could not wait for the episodes to come out, so I just went ahead and found it for free online through the Gutenberg Project, by the way. Um, and I will tell you what, that book is so ahead of its time. The central character, Jane Eyre, I feel like is a very good, now I'm probably going to get canceled because there's some reason that Jane Eyre is terrible, but I think that she's a great role model for women, even in the 21st century. Like some of the things that the character says and does are just, it's just like really forward thinking, especially considering it was written in the 19th century. Um, Oh, I'm seeing N.K. Jemisin. Yes, I love sci-fi. What is that woman's name? Octavia Butler. I highly recommend some Octavia Butler for you out there. Make sure you're diversifying your reading lists and playlists. I work with a woman who, my day job is working in a bakery, and you know, obviously there's all these like workplace politics around who gets to control the radio and, or, you know, the Spotify these days. And this woman who I really like her a lot. Every time she has control of the radio, she puts on like, a, it's basically like a band, a rock band fronted by a white dude. But she said something about like how she likes to switch it up. And I was like, she really has no idea that her tastes are actually quite uniform. So I would say if you look at your Spotify like choices, or I don't have the internet in my life as little as I can. So I've been listening to CDs like an old grandma. But if you look at your Spotify playlist and you see like, oh, this is quite homogenous, switch it up. Type in global funk, see what happens. Check it out, you know, take it. Yes, Octavia Butler. Okay, so now I really will end. But it's been like, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you again to our interpreters, because I didn't speak at all really about access in terms of physical access and people's like physical ability to access our services. And that's something that I and all of us also have to think about. You know, it's just something that I take for granted. You know, my my abilities to just, that the world is built for people who can see and walk and talk, and you know, so let's all think about that as we disperse. Access session tomorrow with the famous Stephanie Haynes. She's a big deal. So okay, thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Lauren. As always, learned so much from you, and I'm excited to check out Global Funk and Spotify, because I have a feeling I felt like you were talking to me, and so I'm going to take it. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We still have a couple sessions left later this afternoon, so head on over to Sked and check those out, or if you need a break, I hope you have a good break. See you all in another session. Thank you.
Bye.